Since COVID hit nearly 4 years ago, healthcare companies can't recruit clinical or patient-facing roles fast enough to backfill the collateral damage to the labor pool. Today, I'm joined with two very special guests, Amber Clayton, a senior director at SHRM, and Desiree Hodges, the talent acquisition manager at Novant Health and a board member of the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. Today, we'll be discussing how to redirect labor cost savings to increase compensation for potential hires, strategies to speed up the screening process while keeping certification requirements top of mind, and how to source hiring for specialized, hard-to-fill roles, ensuring seamless onboarding and immediate productivity. Let's get right into it. Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to improve recruitment of clinical roles in healthcare. First and foremost, to give a little background on workforce.com, we are a full-service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with shift-based staff, such as healthcare. So think everything from scheduling to payroll, time and attendance to HRIS, and so much more. Workforce works with hundreds of healthcare companies, from small mom and pop dentist offices to large-scale medical centers with multiple locations. Across industries, we've been hearing about wanting a solution to recruit more efficiently, which is why we built products like our ATS system, as well as hosting webinars like this to give more actionable advice that they can act on without a credit card. So today I'm joined by two very special guests. I'm joined by Amber Clayton. She is a senior director of the Knowledge Center of Operations over at SHRM, and also Desiree Hodges. She is a talent acquisition manager at Novant Health and a board member of the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, aka the AACN. Desiree, Amber, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Very good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. To get things kicked off, first, Amber, I would love for you to tell me about some of the work that you do with SHRM and your role as senior director of the Knowledge Center.
Of course. So the Knowledge Center, actually, we have a couple of components under there. One of them is our Ask an Advisor service, and it is a member benefit of SHRM where any of our members can call, chat, or email any of our advisors. We have HR advisors who have years of experience and certifications to help them with their HR related questions. We actually handle about 50 to 60,000 inquiries a year. Many of the top topics are around compensation, benefits, and of course, retention and recruitment as well. We get all types from all over the world.
Nice. Desiree, I would love for you to tell me about some of the work you do at Novant and also at AACN.
So my role is a talent acquisition manager for Novant Health. We are a large healthcare facility in the Northeast or Southeast North Carolina. We do have markets in our coastal area, in Winston-Salem area, and also in the Charlotte market. So what I do, I'm actually a nurse, and I lead the centralized hiring strategy for the organization. I have 6 senior nursing hiring managers who does all of the interviewing and hiring for all of our acute care RNs for our inpatient facilities. And I also manage the campus recruitment team. And so I have a team of recruiters who go out and pound the pavement for new grad nurses to come into our residency program. And I serve, as you said, as a national board member, as a director for AACN as well.
I love it. So you're going to have some really great insight, especially coming to that third section, right? Talking a little bit about sourcing for, specialized roles, that sort of thing. So that's perfect. Awesome. Amber, we'll start with you. What are some of the primary issues within healthcare companies that you are predicting that they will experience heavily coming into 2024? I know we're a couple months in, but what are you thinking for the rest of the year?
It's a really good question. So when we conduct our research, we typically do it for all industries, but I do have some information that I think will be really of interest to our listeners. We recently released a talent trends report where a little over 2,300 HR professionals had actually participated in the survey. And again, respondents from organizations of all sizes, wide variety of industries. In general, though, 3 in 4 organizations have had difficulty recruiting full-time regular positions, while nearly half have had difficulty retaining employees. 7 of the top 10 organizations that had the most difficulty filling jobs back in 2016 remain in the top 10 8 years later, and one of those is healthcare. High-skilled medical positions such as nurses, doctors, and specialists, they're number one with the recruitment, and 55% of these are reporting that these positions are very difficult to fill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Desiree, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that is exactly what we're seeing in healthcare across the nation. So, what I see on a daily basis, of course, we all went through the pandemic, right? And a lot of our nurses, just not just nurses, but healthcare, you know, workers, healthcare providers went into the traveling arena. So they went and traveled different places. Of course, they were making higher salaries and things of that nature. Now that we're trying to come out on the other side of the pandemic and having people come back into the facilities, we're competing with salary requirements. So it's very hard to compete with that. It's also very hard to have people come back and work inside of the facilities because of all the trauma that they've experienced while being there. So really working on trying to create an environment that is healthy for them to be able to come into the workspace and be able to function at the highest level. So those are some of the major issues that we see with people coming back to the facilities.
Absolutely. I mean, since COVID, we've seen the term frontline workers and those working on the front lines really skyrocket. And they are nurses, they are doctors. And it was, as you said, traumatizing for a lot. And it really impacted the labor pool that was already quite small going into COVID. After the fact, it's very, very minimal, right? So, of course, pulling those roles is incredibly hard. And Amber, as you were saying, number one hardest roles to recruit is within the healthcare industry. I think that is so, so important to note. Amber, what do you think about, in terms of recruiting and layoffs for clinical roles versus non-clinical roles or admin-based roles? What are you seeing there?
So our research also shows that about 31% of healthcare and social assistance positions, the HR professionals have indicated that they don't have the needed credentials and certifications for the roles, and 60% of their candidates are actually ghosting. Ghosting, of course, is not showing up, not calling back for the interviews. I see Desiree shaking her head. I think this is true for many, many industries. That we're kind of seeing that. And I think it's for both clinical roles as well as for admin roles. I haven't seen any data that specifically says that there's been layoffs for clinical roles. Of course, there's been layoffs for other roles, especially with new technology and artificial intelligence and consolidation. So there have been some, layoffs in different areas. I haven't quite seen it, at least in my experience or in the data, that there's been layoffs in the healthcare field.
Right. Desiree, what are your thoughts?
The ghosting is real.
Yes.
That is a real thing. And I don't think it's something that we were used to in nursing.
Yeah.
If you scheduled an interview, you showed up. If you got hired for your job, you showed up. And so there's so much competition out there. And I think that, sometimes we're picking the one that's the most lucrative at times. We didn't have that type of competition before. So I can definitely co-sign on that ghosting part.
Yeah.
As far as layoffs, I think I haven't seen that. There's been restructuring because we have to, of course, do more with less. I think one of the major issues that I see in the clinical area is the lack of support staff for some of the nursing staff. So we're short staffed with our CNAs, with our certified nursing assistants. We're short staffed with, our food and nutrition partners and all of these different ancillary staff members that support how we deliver care to patients. So a lot of that stuff is placed on top of all the nursing care that the nurses that they're providing. Some of these other tasks are being layered on top of that. And so it's, very difficult for them to go to work knowing that I am going to show up today just to take care of my patient, but they also have these other tasks. And I think that's also too where that salary demand comes in. We've talked about this a lot at work, and it's like we thought that we were getting paid a fair salary to be a nurse, but there's all of these other things that have been added to our plate. And so now we want to be compensated for not only doing this, but all of these other things. So I think that that's a conversation that's out there. I don't have any data that says that, but that's just kind of what we've been hearing.
Yeah, it's kind of falls under the ghosting aspect. It's the ghost bullet points within the job description, right? It's saying, hey, this is what on paper, totally what you're going to be doing, but also there's going to be A, B, and C that you're going to be doing, but you won't learn about that until 3 months down the road when you're committed to the company. So it's a little bit hard in terms of, figuring out, especially for nurses, obviously those who are seeking the job themselves, it's a little bit hard for them to actually gauge what their day-to-day is going to be. And, in terms of the ghosting aspect, Desiree, why do you think ghosting has increased so much, kind of going off of that point? Like if you had to point to a couple of things, what do you think it is?
Again, with no data support, I think it's competing roles.
Yeah.
Like I applied here, but I also applied here, and who's going to give me the most? And also I think and I'm just going to speak for Novant Health, we do a very good job of expediting that hiring process, which is the centralized process that I talked about. We try, and from the time the recruiter reaches out to the candidate and screens them and they are turned over to our team, the centralized hiring team, we work on a 5-day cycle to make sure that that offer is going to that candidate, a decision to hire within 5 days if that candidate is selected. And the reason why that time frame was so important is because we were losing candidates because it was taking a very long time because the managers that are leading the units were in the working inside as well. So they weren't in front of their computers receiving all the candidates, scheduling interviews and all of that. So what the centralized hiring process does, it removes that barrier. It gives the managers time back in their unit to rebuild their culture and nurture the nurses that they do have. And so with that, because we do make a decision pretty quickly one way or the other, we don't expect that in healthcare. We think it's going to take weeks or months, and it doesn't. Sure. But then they're in that time of onboarding, getting ready to get them, going through your background check and all of that, they get a different offer, which may look a little better than this one or have more flexibility or have the shift that they want. And so I think then they ghost us.
Yeah, it's about that turnaround time, though. Truly, it's about consolidating that. And we'll go into that a lot more. Amber, what do you think in terms of if you had to point to a couple of reasons why people are ghosting, what do you think that is?
Yeah, I would agree with what Desiree said. I think, people are looking at the one that has the most lucrative offers, but I also think it's because employers are ghosting too. And it's not just the employees, it's the candidates, it's the employers that are not contacting them back. Surprisingly, you'd think that you need people, but oftentimes they may not hear back from the employer after they've had the interview, and that puts a sour taste in people's mouths. It's they're not going to refer people to work for an organization that doesn't even communicate following the interview or when they get their application or when they're doing their background check and the employer doesn't contact them. So I think it goes both ways.
That's a great point. Truly, it goes back to the COVID aspect and a lot of remote learning, a lot of remote meetings, this kind of thing, right? Where we're all separate from each other. And there's a disconnect that happens there naturally when you're virtual. And I think a lot of people, whether it was intentional or unintentional, of ghosting the employee or the employer, it happens a lot more these days. And it goes back to the age-old quote of treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think that kind of falls in line here a little bit. So yeah, I think the employers are also doing that too. I think that's a really good point. And for those who are in HR who are watching this, making sure that there is constant follow-up, that maybe even you feel like you're over emailing, you're over communicating, because this is a really precarious time for the job seeker as well. And you got to remember that.
I also want to point out too that ghosting happens, of course, in healthcare with the patients, and this is why many of the healthcare providers actually will send a text message to confirm your appointment. They'll call, they'll email,
Absolutely.
and to make sure that the person is coming in for their appointment so they don't have, this wasted time that could be spent on other patients. Or it just happens all around, unfortunately.
I agree with that, Amber. And I'm glad that you said that the other way around, the employer also ghosting. So those are some of the gaps that we have identified in this pandemic, post-pandemic era, where we were just used to sending a meeting invite, interviewing virtually, all of those different things. And I think that sometimes the candidate is like, yes, that's convenient for me. I'll interview. And then you're right, I get the job. Here's the offer. But that there's a gap between the time of I accept and my actual start date. And so those touch points in between, they're so important. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is something that I think that we all could do a bit better with.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in these large organizations where we're filtering so many people each week. So
absolutely. No, those are great points. Amber, you kind of talked on more lucrative offerings, right? One of the reasons why people might go. So I want to focus on this next part in the webinar on how to redirect labor cost savings to increase compensation for potential hires. First and foremost, I want to point to this very first slide we have from an article on business leadership today, and it's how much does compensation matter when recruiting healthcare staff? So looking at a couple of these quotes for those who might just be listening in, this first quote on the left, 80% of healthcare candidates cite pay as the most important factor in their job search. 81% said pay and benefits is the biggest influencing factor for whether they would accept a job offer. And then this last quote saying 3 out of 5 healthcare talent leaders expect retirement savings planning and financial benefits to increase in importance to recruit skilled employees, as reported by SHRM. So I want to hear, Amber, from you, where do you think, just taking into this slide in consideration, where do you think pay ranks in terms of importance for prospective hires?
I think in general, I have data on that. It's 9 out of 10 U.S. workers, or 87%, believe that fair compensation for current employees should be the top priority. So it definitely ranks in the top 3, and it has for the last several years. So I think it's really important for people. But then at the same time, and I think this goes back to one of the things that you mentioned, is that it can't solely be about the compensation and the benefits offering. It's the whole package. And so, looking at workplace culture, your brand, how are you treating people, empathy, do you have, what's been really important to many candidates is mental health and well-being. And, that's, I think, sometimes a mistake, that we focus so much on hiring people at higher rates, but then once they get in there and they realize this really isn't a great place to work, the money's not worth it, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Desiree, what are your thoughts?
The same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I do think for sure it is all about the culture and the environment, and spending time up front with the candidate to let them know what that is when they're coming into it. And I think the more times that they hear it, because they have so many different touch points until they actually get to the actual first day of the job, and having that culture discussed, all of the things that we do to support your emotional well-being and all of those things, talking about the environment, talking about the values, the core values of the organization. I think every touch point that they have, you have to really drive that home, because you're right. Yes, up front, you're going to get a salary, but, and I think we probably all have workplaces where the money just it doesn't matter, because if I'm not treated fair, or if I feel like my work environment is not a positive one, that affects your mental health.
Yep.
I mean, no doubt. And so I think that we have to really look at some of those things and really have our partners and organizations put out there what that looks like. Why should culture matter to you? Why should your benefits matter to you? All of those things. And I think that if we focus some of the attention on that, then yes, I'm going to get paid a fair salary. It's not like you're going to go make $20 more at a hospital across the street than this one, because it's all fair and equitable, like in the market. And I think people are, for the most part, honestly competitive with their pay. It's really about what type of work culture you're looking for.
Absolutely. As a nurse, Desiree, and somebody who's a part of the AACN, what are some areas that you think where labor cost savings can actually be identified or spared, so to speak, without compromising patient care or staff satisfaction?
That is a hard question to ask a nurse. Because it's definitely not the nurse, I don't think. That's a hard question. But when I sit back and think about it, I think it's some of the work that I'm doing currently. So really providing the support to the nurse leader who's leading the unit, and maybe that helps offset some of the, I don't know if it's, I think it still has a financial impact, because if I'm more productive in retention, like if I'm retaining more, it in turn reduces that labor cost, right? It costs, we know, thousands of dollars to onboard someone. So we can continue to hire people all day long, but if we do not fix the culture and the environment where they work, they're going to leave. And guess what? We're going to be doing it all over again. So I don't really look at it as, can I cut this job or cut that job? I look at it two different ways. I look at it, if I'm fully staffed, if I have appropriate staffing, then I can deliver quality care. My outcomes will be fine, and we'll get reimbursed as we're supposed to. The other place we look at savings is that retention. If I retain the staff that I have, I'm not continuously spending thousands and thousands of dollars to recruit and also retrain people to come in and out of the department. So I really don't look at it as cutting labor. I look at it as being strategic with the labor and looking at the environment that you have.
That's a great point. And the turnover costs themselves really is huge in terms of labor costs. So of course, mitigating that, again, making sure your culture is in check, making sure your staff is relatively engaged and not on the verge of burnout, which I think is something really important to highlight within the healthcare industry when we're kind of talking about clinical roles. I think that's so important. Amber, what are your thoughts on, labor cost savings without sacrificing patient or staff satisfaction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think just making sure that there's appropriate staffing levels. I think that, looking at those patient to staff ratios, I know that there's, certain requirements, but at the same time, you don't want a nurse who's handling too many patients and then it's sacrificing the quality of the work. Something, for example, where documentation and let's say they don't have time and they end up coding things incorrectly, and then the insurance isn't, paying what they should be paying. So there's a savings there if you have, accurate information in your documentation, and all of these things kind of affect one another. So I think as far as maybe labor cost savings, I would say, looking to your internal staff in your succession planning, and do you have people who you might be able to upskill to be able to take on some of those CNA and CMA positions. I know there was I don't remember the name of the company or the person, but our CHRO had spent some time with someone who worked in the hospital, and they were actually upskilling people who were in like janitorial positions to become CNAs. And, I think, trying to do things in-house can be really helpful.
Yep, absolutely. I think the aspect of upskilling is really important. We actually have this medical center called My Health, and they have 80 so locations, over 800 staff, right? So they have a lot to manage, a lot on the bird's eye perspective for their CHRO. Natasha, who's their systems development manager, we have a whole article on our site that you guys can look into about this, but they're having issues with labor cost, right? Maintaining 80 practices is a very hefty load. And obviously talking about the 800 plus staff, the thought of increasing wages to actually remain competitive was beyond possibilities, right? It wasn't even in the cards for them. So they actually ended up signing up with us and using the timesheet and payroll automation all in one system. They're able to cut down on the admin side of things, the admin costs. And, instead of spending hours and hours a week, they're able to save a ton of hours and actually use people who were on the admin side of things and upskill them to more manager positions, recruitment positions, that sort of things, thinking of, spending more time there and using their time and money more efficiently putting that towards wages, whatever it was. So they were actually able to save over 200 a week, even just on the admin side of things, because it was automated with things like Workforce, their HCM system. So things like that, again, getting technological with it, very, very helpful, right? And I think it really adds up at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter. Desiree, I'm curious, how do you recommend balancing the need for, speed in the screening process with the importance of a thorough background check I'm sorry, I'm totally skipping around here. Disregard. Desiree, how do you recommend HR benchmark pay amongst competitors or companies in their sub-industries? So thinking, vet, dentist, even large-scale hospitals, whatever their niche might be.
I think when I think about that, it's really, it's hard to compare because it's not apples to apples, but
Sure.
There are different ways. I think that healthcare as a whole, they really do a good job with that benchmarking piece. I think where it's really looking at the value that the person is bringing. And even though this is our benchmark for healthcare workers, right? CNA should get paid this amount, RN should get paid this amount. Really looking at, I think we look at benchmarking, but we also, is someone doing evaluation of those people that are taking care of patients and
Right.
that are out in the community, because it's not just what we do inside the hospital, we also have to serve the families and the communities around us. And so I think there's a lot more value to bring, to look at. I think we should look at things a little differently. Nursing, I've been a nurse for almost 30 years. So I can tell you the skills that I had 30 years ago and what I was doing then is totally different. And what was required of me to be a new grad nurse at that time is totally different for what is required now in the specialties that nurses have. And not even just nurses, like CNAs. I was a CNA the whole time I was in college. And what I was doing then, like now there's these additional skills that CNAs have, like you said, upscaling. Now they do EKGs and blood draws in some of the facilities. Right. And so I think it's really, yes, we do benchmark across the healthcare arena, but is there a valuation that goes along with it? And so I think that at this point, I would really love to see that.
Absolutely. And you have a great point in not getting caught up in the weeds with benchmarking, with metrics. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people and we're dealing with families, we're dealing with patients. It's important to make sure that qualitative data isn't getting trumped, or that quantitative data isn't trumping the qualitative data. So Amber, I'm curious what your thoughts are, more from that HR standpoint in benchmarking.
Sure. I think, and this doesn't just go with the healthcare, but any organization should be looking at their salaries and comparing them to the market and, determining whether or not they can either exceed or meet, or they might have to lag the market. And what are they going to do if they're not reaching that market rate? I think one of the things that employers tend to do is give the standard benefit package to everybody and give, one salary to everybody, whereas they should really be customizing it, looking at your population of employees and determining what are their needs. If I'm a college student and I come to work for your organization, for me, it might not matter that I get early retirement. I might want student loan debt repayment.
Right.
Just like if I'm someone who's retired coming back into work, dependent care is not going to be something that I'm going to need. So, really looking at your employee populations and making customizations, for your employee population is important. And also too, with the compensation, there's a lot of organizations that can increase their compensation. So there might be other things they can do, like a bonus, or they can do, merit increases at a certain amount, or I know some people have like a sign-on bonus, things like that. So there could be some other things that are monetary that could be done that aren't necessarily, just increasing the wages. I will say on the compensation side, though, there are many employers that are voluntarily posting their ranges on their job postings. Some states actually do require it now. And what they're finding is that they're getting more people applying for the jobs because they're putting it out there. This is how much we pay. And then you're having people say, okay, I can do that. And I'm going to come in and apply for this job, as opposed to another organization that might not put their ranges.
I think that's a great point, kind of feeding into this next question, but this is a really good point to present to leadership if HR is having any issues with roadblocks within leadership teams, saying, hey, we're not sure about reallocating these labor cost savings to compensation or to benefits or to a bonus. So Amber, what do you think other roadblocks might be that HR might come across when presenting to leadership, saying, hey, what if we reallocated these labor cost savings to compensation, and how can they overcome these said roadblocks?
Yeah, I think oftentimes there are roadblocks in the not being able to see the long-term gain from actually, maybe increasing the benefits or enhancing them or the compensation. So I think, it takes an HR professional to really look at the data and say, hey, look, if we did this, the return on investment will be that.
Sure.
And really showing them and, financially how it could impact the organization, but also be able to help the patients and the employees. And so I think it's just a matter of coming up with that business case to present to them, instead of just saying, hey, can we implement this technology and it costs $20,000? What's the return? So you got to just think,
Yes.
what's the return? How long is it going to take? I think just sharing that monetary value and the value to the patients and the employees is going to be key.
Absolutely. It's about balancing the buck at the end of the day, right? And seeing, all right, where does this pay off and how can we pay it off, right? I think that's a great point. I want to feed into this next part. And we kind of talked about it a little bit in the intro, talking about ghosting and, turnover time in the recruitment process, but strategies to speed up the screening process while keeping certification requirements top of mind, which very obviously is super important within the healthcare space. So Desiree, we'll start with you. What are some common bottlenecks healthcare organizations often come across in the hiring process for clinical roles?
So, validating some of the credentials for our advanced practitioners, that is a huge bottleneck. Like we can, get them recruited and interviewed and hired, and then the credentialing takes months. And that is weeks, sometimes depending on the area that they're going into. And I think that's one of them. Another bottleneck that I see, because we do a lot of the recruiters, they do a lot of sourcing. I've been learning what sourcing is. It is a word, but it is a big word in talent acquisition. So the nurses were all like, what does that mean exactly? Sourcing. And just to give some historical background, my department used to sit under nursing. And then we got moved under talent acquisition for obvious reasons, because that's who we worked with all the time. And we had a little bit more access to certain things over in the people and culture space. So we're learning all about sourcing. So I think that we're casting wide nets and things like that. And so I think before we didn't have dedicated sourcers, and now we do, which is amazing. And so I can see that bottleneck opening up a little bit, because they can really, that net that's been cast so wide, they can narrow things down so the recruiter can actually do an appropriate screening of the candidates. So we know that they're qualified. We know that they've met the minimum requirements. And so then once they're passed off to the team for interviews, we're interviewing a quality candidate. And so we're just looking to see, what are you bringing to us? How can we enhance your life as well, to make sure that is a mutual fit. So it's gotten so much better and has helped with expediting that hiring process, because I always tell the team it's a difference between being fast and efficient. Yes. We don't want to be fast necessarily, because we don't want to miss something and not validate credentials and not do all of these different things and really do a skills assessment. Because right now, we have people from all over with different experience levels applying for roles, and the skills sometimes aren't there. There's different sizes of facilities, there's different acuities in facilities, and you have to think about, what does my education infrastructure look like? How many preceptors am I going to have available? So I don't want to just pile people into a unit and they're not going to get a great onboarding experience, because that will cause turnover as well. So it's really looking at all of those different things. And so our team works very closely with both talent, the recruiters and the unit leaders to say, this is what we've got. Can we make this work? And things like that. So I think that bottleneck has opened up. Having dedicated sourcers helps with that. And also understanding and knowing the departments and what the needs are. How many experienced people do you have here? Can you take new ones? Can you take more experienced ones? And all of those different things. So really understanding whether you have a person like a senior nursing hiring manager, or if you're the recruiter, communicating directly with the unit leader, understanding what those needs are. And so you're just not sending people, and that it is meaningful. The candidate that you're sending, it is a meaning. Like when you receive a candidate as a manager, when I was a nurse manager of the unit, I knew when my recruiter sent me somebody, I'm probably going to hire that person, because we had that relationship. She knew my unit, she knew my needs. And so I think that that's the relationship that you build, and then that bottleneck won't be there.
I love that you highlighted how you guys are in constant communication, right? There's a lot of moving parts within the talent acquisition and the recruitment side of things, but you guys are all communicating, and especially within those larger organizations, I think that's really important. I want to highlight this next slide that we have here, talking a little bit about fixing those common hiring bottlenecks. And this is from an article from Vizient. And, looking at a couple of these points, talking about control the number of job openings beyond a certain time frame to reduce workload. This kind of feeds in, I think, with those smaller organizations, again, those mom and pop type healthcare shops. And I think that it's really important to consolidate and making sure that, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And even if you have 2 people on the recruiting side of things, or even if it's just a lone HR person doing all of it, making sure that it's something that you can do within a certain time frame, and consolidating all of those job openings, those job postings that you wrote. And again, making sure you're hiring the right people, hiring really quality candidates. Another one is consider allowing recruiters to negotiate job offers rather than hiring managers. Recruiters may have additional training to help ensure greater consistency across offers. Again, somebody who really specializes in this, I think it's really important to make sure you're bringing in the right people on the internal side of the team to make sure that, hey, they have a really good grasp on negotiating job offers or salaries here. Let's have them focus on this. This last point I think is really fantastic. Take time to survey new hires' experiences for key metrics such as ease in navigating an application website, time from application to offer, and quality of job description and requirements. This is something where, we have launched our applicant tracking system on workforce side of things. We want to make this a lot easier. This last point really speaks to the applicant side of our product. And again, making sure that people who are coming through the door are quality, and it's really easy for the hiring manager, the recruiter, the lone HR manager to sift through all of those applications and making sure, hey, we have some really great people here. Let's let them proceed on, or this is where this stops here. We're going to get rid of this application, and thank them for their time accordingly. Because again, treat others the way you'd want to be treated, making sure we're over communicating, if anything. Amber, what are your thoughts on, hiring bottlenecks as somebody who has been in the healthcare space? Did any of these speak to you? Is this something that you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked in urgent care, pediatrics, and hospice, and recruited for the nurses, the CNAs, the CMAs, and other positions, other specialty positions. And, it was a challenge. We had situations where background checks, sometimes depending on the area that they were in, they had manual processes maybe in their courts. And so it took a little bit longer to get criminal background checks, for example. We also had to get DMV checks on our employees because they were doing home hospice. So they were driving their vehicles as well. So the background check did take a while. I think what some employers can do is make sure that when you have your job postings, your job listings, that you have all the information on there about what's required for the position, so that the candidate knows up front, what it is that they need in order to have a position with the organization. And then also too, some employers will outsource. They'll use another organization to conduct the background checks to make it easier on the employer. I hope many of them do. It's just, administratively that could be a burden, and to have, more people working on those is probably going to expedite the process a little bit more than doing it yourself. And then also too, some employers work with agencies who already do that for them. So they've already taken the time to actually do all of those things ahead of time. The other thing is technology too. With applicant tracking systems, with AI, you're able to, filter through some of those resumes and applications that don't meet the minimum requirements of the position. You have to just be cautious of course, with AI, is that you're not inadvertently discriminating against anyone based on a protected class by the filters that you're putting into the system. We're human. We're the ones that are putting those in there. So you just have to be careful to make sure that everyone is having an equal opportunity to be able to apply for the jobs. But again, that can help streamline some of it as well. And I just wanted to just mention too, you had said something about streamlining the application process. And in our talent trends report, we actually had under healthcare and social assistance that that was one of the things that many of the employers were doing. They were, I think it was, and if you can give me one moment, let me see if I can bring this up. So 48% of healthcare and social assistance companies were streamlining their application process to make it easier to complete, versus 37% for all industries. So that's, a pretty big difference between all industries and healthcare. Another thing that some of the healthcare and social assistance organizations were doing were collaborating with educational institutions too. 49% of healthcare social assistants were doing that versus 37% for all industries. So yeah, so those are some, big differences just because of the nature of the work and the challenges that, these healthcare organizations have.
Absolutely. And again, I think you brought up a good point, leaning a little bit on technology. Desiree, I don't know if Novant does that, but do you guys use any automation, any technology when you guys are sifting through applicants, the screening process, anything like that?
I think they do. I get them on the back end, but I'm sure, yes, I think there's some automation I mean, I would hope.
Right. Of course.
Thousands of applicants, so yeah.
We're, as we're in the midst of tax season, right? I was thinking about this analogy, right? It's like having your taxes sent out or doing it on like Free Tax USA and trying to sift through all that information as it goes just right over everybody's head. And it's something where it's a nice to have. Absolutely. It's a nice to have when you have automation, you have technology in your back pocket, but the time saved on your side and, the stress that it saves you is, there's nothing better than that, truly. So I completely agree with that. In terms of sourcing for specialized roles, for those hard to fill roles, I want to kind of go into that a little bit. And also, of course, here ensuring a very seamless onboarding process so they can hit the ground running on day one. I want to first point to this third slide here, talking a little bit about sourcing prospects for these hard to fill roles. And this is from an article from Recruiting Daily. And just to kind of run through a couple of these 7 points, this first one, asking current employees for referrals, using your existing network, connections. I think that's absolutely key here. Creating growth opportunities and advancement goals. Upskilling, we're talking about making sure that people feel that they're being productive and useful, an actual cog in the organization rather than somebody just sitting on the sidelines watching the world go by. Establish relationships with industry-specific recruiters, again, going back to the aspect of people who are specialized within the healthcare industry. Using assessment tools, an employee referral system that has been really, really strong. I've seen people use employee referral systems and actually reward those who have referred after they've hit their 90-day mark, whatever it might be. Recruitment marketing, obviously that is something for probably those bigger organizations that have a little bit bigger of a budget, able to put some of that aside for recruitment campaigns, and then reach out proactively to candidates who have signed up for candidate databases, improves response time and reply rates. Again, lowering that turnover rate in terms of the recruitment side of things, I think is absolutely huge.
Mhm.
Desiree, my question for you is, what are some effective sourcing strategies that HR can utilize to attract candidates for those hard to fill clinical roles?
So I just got off the phone today with the other talent acquisition managers that I work with. So they're my peers and they manage the RN recruiters. And so what they do is they rely on, all the data that we have, all the vacancies, what are our high priority units, and really use their sourcers to really be strategic about sourcing for some of those hard to fill positions. I can't tell you how valuable, like I said, we just learned what that was. And not too long ago, we were like, oh boy. I don't know what we thought. I think we just thought candidates fell out of the sky somewhere. I'm not sure. But having that team in place and really getting to know them, they spend a lot of time with my team to, like I said, to get to understand the organization as a whole, what the units are looking for and where can they. So we even have some sourcers that like to work during the nighttime because nurses work at night and they're on the computer, on their breaks and at lunch looking for things. They look at their phone at night. And so really being strategic that way, in that sense as well, because who do we want? Night shift nurses. So that's what we're looking for. And so I think that being strategic and targeted, areas that we're looking for, I think that's key for sourcing as well.
That's such a good point. I love the idea of, again, recruiters who know the industry well, who kind of speak the language of, in this case, maybe night nurses who we're trying to recruit more. In this case, I think that's really important. And I think that's really smart. Amber, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I do have, again, some information from our new talent trends report on this, on just non-traditional sourcing. I think, something that we've kind of talked about over the past few years when with this, what has been coined the Great Resignation, is not just, posting a position online and then that's it, but actually looking at some of the non-traditional sources, your boomerang employees, people who have left the organization, do they want to come back? People who have retired, active duty military veterans, their spouses, older workers, opportunity youth is another one, individuals with disabilities, or individuals that have been formerly incarcerated. Let's say they had, a minor marijuana charge or something 10 years ago, and not excluding those individuals. So really, when you're sourcing, looking at areas that you could do it where, you can find people where you wouldn't typically find people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the onboarding process, right, making sure that people are hitting the ground running, Amber, I'll start with you. I'm curious what you recommend healthcare organizations actually do to better approach the onboarding process as a whole to ensure that seamless transition straight into the company for those, very specific roles that were already hard to source for, let alone onboard. What do you think that they should do to kind of better that process?
So it's actually been a while since I've recruited for healthcare positions. So, but I think in general, though, having a formal onboarding process or program is really important. You just don't want to hire someone and say, here you go, you're in this department, and kind of throw you to the wolves,
right.
And that's it. As an onboarding, it's not just new hire paperwork. It's, going in, it's the new hire paperwork, it's the training, it's the mentorship. Maybe they have a buddy that they are paired with. It's, making sure that you have frequent communication with them. Onboarding can take up to a year. So just not allowing them to come in and say, okay, you've done your week and that's it, because more than likely you're going to end up losing that individual. Most people leave within the first year of employment just because they, came into something that they thought was one thing and it turned out to not be. The other thing that I do, and I don't know if this is something that healthcare entities could do, I guess it would depend on their areas, but job previews are great to be able to come in, to be able to talk to other employees, to be able to see what the environment's like, to see what the job role is, and just kind of observe can really help someone identify whether or not it's a good fit for them, just like we're seeing if they're a good fit for us. So that's something that I always like to do and encourage employers to do.
I love that. It's almost like career day at
Yeah,
college.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
like being like, hey, this could be your future. What do you think? I think that's great. And I think it's different. I don't think a lot of healthcare companies are doing that. Desiree, what do you think about, the onboarding process, how it could be better streamlined?
Yeah. So, yes, onboarding into a hospital it's it's a very lengthy process.
Yeah.
Because everybody's coming to that corporate orientation that first week. I think maybe streamlining some of that, looking at all of that, because it's the same every healthcare organization that you work for, every hospital, everybody's going to orientation that first week. And yes, a lot of that is regulatory stuff. So the regulatory stuff, could we figure out how to streamline that and organize that in a nice package that could be part of online learning maybe? And then you can spend time on the culture and what your cause is and all of those things, because that is that's that last stamp of, now I'm finally here. I heard all these things on my touch points about culture and cause and all of that. And now I'm really going to embrace all of that because I'm finally here, and then show up to your unit. So I think that is, I think that's every person who's ever been through hospital orientation. They would love to have that regulatory stuff.
Yes.
We have to have it streamlined. I do think there is value for shadowing. That is a slippery slope with the HIPAA violations and things like that. So that's why many organizations don't do it, because we don't have someone just manning, volunteering, signing the paper, volunteers coming in and things like that, because it's at this point, we just can't operationalize that. But we do offer unit tours. So I think having organization offer those, again, going back to some of the basics, like, yes, we had to interview virtually before, but really it got convenient for all of us, for the leaders, for them, the candidates. And the candidates, sometimes they think that's, okay, that's convenient for me, I'll do it. And then, yes, I'll meet my leader virtually, and then I show up to work and I'm like, oh gosh, either this unit is larger than what I thought it was, I'm going to be walking all day, or we're like a pack of sardines in here, I can't even move or breathe. So I think that there's value to going back to some of those basics of those in-person interviews as much as we can, especially for some of those hard to fill roles, and some of those high priority areas. I think offering that up front and getting that in for the interview, here's your tour, so you can make an informed decision. And that also, I think, decreases turnover as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Amber.
I was going to say another thing, and I love the unit tour because, of course, you want to work in a good work environment, especially if you're having to come in and not work remotely. So that's great. I also think, too, allowing interviews with the people who are in that particular role that they're applying for. I think that's really helpful, too, so that they can hear from someone, and it actually makes the employee feel like they have an in with who's being hired within the organization. And so I think that's really helpful. I was thinking about the job previews. Yeah, you don't want a nurse going into the emergency room and a candidate coming in and going, oh wow, look at that, in the emergency room. But maybe some of the other positions, the non-clinical positions, that could be something where someone might be able to do a job preview as well. So yeah, I mean, that's a good thing to do. I mean, you want to make sure that it's a good fit for them and it's a good fit for you.
Absolutely. Desiree, you talked a little bit about like the regulatory aspects, streamlining that when it comes to the onboarding. It's the onboarding process for healthcare is obviously very specific. We actually have a client called Care Agency Services, and they are an aged care, elderly care company. They have a couple locations, but they're great. But every year they have to onboard a couple hundred of employees just because of the demand, right? It fluctuates. And not that it's a super specific role, aged care to have to fill, nurses and whatnot within this segment, but it's a lot of people that the recruitment team had to onboard, and they're actually able to cut it down by 94% in terms of the timing of it, because it went down from 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes 2 hours to actually get these people onboarded with the paperwork, to just 2 minutes because of the onboarding mobile app on the phone. They're able to just get everybody in and quickly hit the ground running, and able to spend more time. Recruitment team members were able to spend more time touring the facilities with them, being their buddy, actually showing them in person, kind of increasing that engagement as well right off the bat, right? Making sure they're hitting the ground running. And yeah, and they were able to take some of that, grueling paperwork out of the picture. And I think that's super important. So yeah, some of that regulatory stuff, of course, it's super important compliance wise, right? We need to make sure that we're remaining compliant. But at the same time, if you can just automate it, have it already put in, the back end on the HR side of things and filed away, organized, amazing, amazing. Saving 94% of time for recruiters in HR, I'll take it. So in terms of, the importance of retention for, more specialized, hard to fill clinical roles, Desiree, what steps can you recommend that maybe HR recruitment managers take during the onboarding process to actually foster a more supportive environment, an engaging environment that encourage longevity?
I think it is, like you said, that over communication. I think once they hit the unit, having frequent check-ins, as much as possible, everyone who's involved in that person's onboarding, like their preceptor, their unit educator, if they have one, making sure that everybody is on the same page and making it so that even though my preceptor was assigned to me, maybe I have a different learning style, and making it comfortable, making it an open environment for them to be able to openly share. This isn't working for me. I need a different learning style, or I need something different, for us to be able to meet the needs of the candidate, as well as the candidate meets the needs of the organization as well. So I think that it's those frequent check-ins and creating it as an open environment and not just a checklist like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, did you get this done? Did you get this done? Do you know where the fire hydrants are? Like all that kind of stuff. So it's really a more meaningful conversation with, early on, you start maybe every 2 weeks, just meeting until you get through that first, couple months, because orientation expands anywhere between 8 to 16 weeks based on where the person is going to work in the role and unit acuity, that kind of thing. But whatever that looks like, having those frequent touch points up front, I think is key to making sure that they don't leave within that first year. And then even after that, yes, we have one-on-one check-ins with all of our employees, but maybe during that first year, they're even more frequent until they get to that second year mark and you feel comfortable that this person is actually engaged in the unit. So, and it's that mentorship program, all of those different things to help support that person to be become part of the team.
I love that there's an idea of where, the timeline should be in terms of the marketing, right? Like, okay, the second they hit 2 years, feeling pretty good about the stickiness of this new hire, at least new for 2 years at that point, or, the longevity of it, how engaged they are. And not to say that you should go completely slack on the engagement side of things, but, you can pull back a little bit at that point and saying, okay, we see the average retention of an employee who hits this milestone, and we see that they're able to stick around for 3 more years at that point. I think that's really important. Amber, what do you think in terms of just engagement protocols, even if it's more generalized?
Yeah, I think, again, pairing a new employee with someone who's more tenured is really helpful. Engagement surveys. I was just talking to another person who said that they have net promoter scores, not just for their customers, but also for their employees as well. And really kind of those pulse surveys, if you will, checking in, see how everybody's doing. There's technology that you can actually, when you want to meet with someone, you could have like a scale, a rating scale. How are you feeling today? Are you doing well? Are you doing not so well? And, having those conversations, like you said, Desiree, that are not just checking the boxes, but like, how are you doing? How are you feeling about the job? Are there any concerns? What can I help you with? That's part of being that empathetic leader and being able to, make sure that you are, assessing, is this person burned out? Has their behavior changed? Is there something different, and have, benefits, EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, or the healthcare, or whatever benefits that you offer to your employees, making sure that they know that those are available to them as well, and being supportive. I think all of those things could really help retain employees.
Yeah, I love it. Desiree, we'll start with you. I'd love to end with this final question here. What are one or two top tips, actions, or takeaways our audience can leave with to improve recruitment of these clinical roles?
I think the most important thing is having a trusting relationship with your recruiter, spending time with them as if you're the hiring leader, spending time with the recruiter and helping them understand what your needs are, not just an intake form and saying, check, check, check. The boxes have to kind of go away. And if you are an in-market recruiter, meeting with them in the unit and seeing the environment and seeing the facility, I think that would be my one takeaway.
I love it. Amber, what about you?
So I would say, and I don't know, Desiree, if you were on this think tank, but a couple of years ago, I participated in a nurse staffing think tank. It was with the American Nursing Association, some other organizations, and we came up with some not guidelines, but guidance for healthcare entities to be able to help recruit and retain their employees. So I would say, check that out. If you just Google nurse staffing think tank or the American Nursing Association, you can go online and you could see that. We talked about work schedule flexibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, innovative care delivery models, total compensation, and creating that healthy work environment, which we talked about earlier. It's not just about the physical safety, but it's about the psychological safety as well. And so I think, it has some really great tips in there for individuals who are recruiting for healthcare positions,
Yes.
specifically nurses, but I think it's still helpful overall for anyone.
Yes.
Absolutely. I just looked it up myself. It is something I will definitely be checking out. Amber,
Yes.
Desiree, thank you guys so much for coming on today. I mean, I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. This is a super important topic, something that is very top of mind, and I'm sure will be for the rest of 2024 and honestly probably to come as well. Thank you guys again for coming on today. I really appreciate all your insight and advice.
Thank
You
you.
are so welcome. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. For those who want to check out more content like this, be sure to check out our channel, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, I will see you at the next webinar. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for watching that segment from our webinar on how to improve recruitment of clinical roles in healthcare. If you'd like to watch the full webinar, click this video here and be sure to subscribe for more content like this.